All right, thank you. If you would go ahead and call the FOIA Advisory Council meeting to order, and if you would please call the roll.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Calling the roll for the members, we have Senator Locke present. We have Senator Stewart.
Present.
I have Delegate Simon.
Present.
Delegate Wampler.
I'm here, present.
I have Dr. Treadway.
Present.
Mr. Potter.
Present.
Mr. Wade.
Present.
Mr. Reeves.
Present.
Mr. Coleburn. Okay, not hearing from Mr. Coleburn. He did say he may be a little bit late today. Mr. Bujakowski.
Present.
Mr. Conrad.
Present.
Ms. King-Cas.
Present.
And Mr. James.
Present.
Dr. Jankowski.
And then Mr. Seltzer. Again, Mr. Seltzer also said he may be late today. So it looks like 12 out of 14 members here.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining today. Appreciate your attendance and hope you had a great Thanksgiving holiday. And so we have a new member. I would like to welcome to the FOIA Council, Mr. Chitty James, who's a partner with the law firm of Blankenship and Keith, PC. He was appointed by the Speaker of the House of Delegates to fill the seat for a citizen member, which was formerly held by Michael Stern, as Mr. Stern's term expired on June 30th, 2020. So Mr. James, welcome. And if you would like to give us a few words about yourself.
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. This is my first time serving on a committee like this. I'm an attorney with Blankenship and Keith in Fairfax, Virginia. I do FOIA requests in almost every case. So these issues are important to me. I am not prejudging anything, but I do like the idea of making sure that the citizen is able to get information about what the government is doing, police reports, and various other things. I think it's important that we have open access. So I'm glad to serve, and I know that I'm a newbie, so I'm going to be quiet and listen.
Thank you and welcome. We appreciate you serving.
Thanks.
We would like to go ahead and get into our business for the day. Very important issues to cover this afternoon. We will begin with our subcommittee reports. At our meeting on August 4th, 2020, the FOIA Council assigned one bill by the 2020 session of the General Assembly. One bill was referred by the first 2020 special session of the General Assembly, and we had one resolution heard by the Council in 2019. And unanimously referred for further study to 3 subcommittees for additional study. So the work of the fishing study, elections, and criminal incident information subcommittees, we will be hearing from this afternoon. So we will begin with the fishing study subcommittee's report. So let's begin there. I think that's Dr. Treadway. All right.
Yes, you all have on the agenda, I think, a very nice summary of the meeting that the subcommittee held on November 17th. And we did not have enough time to follow up on some recommendations that we had to meet again. So we delegated to the staff and asked them to draft some language based on some conversation that we had at the meeting. So we looked at protecting personal contact information that would appear in correspondence between members of the public and public bodies or members of public bodies, where the public needed to provide that information in order to be on a mailing list or get information from a government body. And then we separately looked at just general correspondence that the public might have with public bodies or members of public bodies, and protecting personal contact information in those. And we asked the staff to draft some language based on that conversation. And I certainly would defer to Alan to walk us through that. We did look at whether there was other actions that we could recommend through FOIA to discourage or prevent phishing attacks on public employees, which really was at the heart, I think, of Delegate Heretik's original resolution. But the subcommittee could not come to any agreement at all on what we could do that would be effective there. So we did not take any action on that. Alan, would you like to walk the full council through where we are, knowing that the language that Alan and staff worked on, the committee saw it the first time that the full council did as well. So we have not actually voted on the language.
Thank you. So everyone knows these are posted up to the meeting minutes page on the FOIA Council website, so you can go along the drafts with me. And the first one posted, I just want to double check to make sure I can do these in the correct order. Yeah, it's draft that ends in 968D in the upper left-hand corner. Drafts would amend what is currently subdivision 10 of 2.2-3705.01. These are the exemptions of general application, and sub 10 is an exemption for personal contact information. When you look at draft 968, you'll see that it expands the current so that it applies to information furnished to a public body or any of its members, both for the purpose of receiving electronic mail was the existing exemption. This changed it to electronic communications. And then it also is designed to flip the requirement where currently the person signing up to receive email would have to intentionally opt out and say, please do not release my information. This would flip that to an opt-in provision where by default the information would be exempt unless the person says otherwise. There are some questions I know that have been raised since the last subcommittee meeting. I would point out one of the questions, I discussed this with Ashley about the question of any of its members, where in this draft, if you compare it to the other draft, 969, that one talks about members or employees. So there's a kind of a question for both drafts, whether the intent would be to cover just members, and if so, does that mean elected members, appointed members, or exactly which members we want to include, or do we also want to include employees? And if I may, I'd go on to the second draft since they're both amending the same section. If you look at that one, it is draft ending in 969D. With that one, with the first one, I should point out, it's when someone signs up to receive email. So this is generally email newsletters, that kind of thing. And this would expand it to other electronic communication. So that could cover other forms of social media, text messages, etc. But again, the first draft 968 is still limited to the members and flips the opt-out provision. The second draft instead covers general correspondence with the public body, its members, or employees. So that would not just be signing up one way to receive email or other messages. It would be pretty much any type of correspondence with a public body. So there's definitely a difference in scope as well.
Yes.
I would also point out, I don't know if the council wants to hear from the public on each of these drafts. For those who have signed up, we do have, looks like about 6 people signed up to speak to the phishing study committee drafts.
Yes, we would like to hear from anyone who has signed up.
you have Milissa in the room.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Would you like me to go now?
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you. My name is Milissa Spring. I'm a senior deputy county attorney in Loudoun County, and I just wanted to briefly speak with the council to indicate Loudoun County's support for the proposed amendments, specifically to Chapter 2.2-3705.1, subparagraph 10, especially the addition of the phrase or any of its members to the current language in that section. The Loudoun County Board of Supervisors does not send out newsletters to citizens as a board, but many of the 9 members of the board have their own constituent newsletters that contain information that's specific to their districts, and those are sent out by email. So citizens provide their email addresses to the elected official in order to receive the newsletters. Permitting the public body to withhold email addresses, but not individual members of the body, appears to draw an artificial distinction. And the definition of public body under 2.2-3701 includes constitutional officers. So under the current language of 2.2-3705, paragraph 10, if an elected constitutional officer were to offer these same types of newsletters to the public, he or she would be able to withhold the email addresses furnished to him or her for the purpose of receiving that communication from the constitutional officer. So it's really inconsistent to permit one set of elected officials to protect a citizen's email address, but not another set of elected officials. So in order to reduce phishing and protect citizens to the greatest extent possible, and also to reduce administrative burdens on IT departments of public bodies, having the default be a position of non-disclosure certainly makes sense, and citizens can choose to permit the release of their email addresses. So we would urge you to accept the subcommittee's recommendations with respect to the provisions of 2.2-3705.1, subparagraph 10. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Who do we have next?
Joshua Heslinga.
Mr. Heslinga?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you very much to the council for the time. I am the Director of Legal and Legislative Services at the Virginia Information Technologies Agency, VITA, and that's the capacity in which I'm the FOIA officer for VITA, and wrote with some comments to staff yesterday. Thank you to staff for posting those. I'll be very respectful with the council's time because I tried to say everything that I had to say in the written comments, but just to say that redacting has a technology need and impact, and imposes a cost in terms of time, which may translate into money for costs of particular requests. And so I made a few specific comments about the 2 different drafts in writing. It wasn't clear to me that the opt-in or opt-out worked the way that was intended. But the overall concern that I wanted to speak to was just to urge the council to consider the increased costs and impact on FOIA personnel of increasing redaction, which seems to be what these drafts would likely lead to. And then also in particular highlighting the fact that these may lead to calls for redaction of information that's not particularly confidential. And here I'm talking about the inclusion of business contact information in 969. So other than that, I'll defer to my written comments, but if anyone has questions or something, happy to talk further.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your comments.
Thank you.
Next, we have Megan Rhyne.
Thank you, Ms. Ryan.
Hi, Hi, thank you, Madam Chair, and to members of the council. I appreciate your time and appreciate the subcommittee's work on these bills. I want to start with 69D first, if I could. I just wanted to point out, this is a much broader expansion of the proposal that was brought from Loudoun County, which we have no real disagreement with in concept. But this particular 69D draft does contemplate shielding contact information for anyone who contacts government. That could be an individual, or it could be a company, it could be a lobbyist, an attorney, anything like that. And even when we're talking about a citizen, it is often a citizen who is contacting the government because the citizen wants something, expects something, or wants to influence something. And we think that there is value in having that contact information available to if and when there is not a name attached, when it is just being used as a contact point through an email address. I know that reporters also will use it as an identifier to keep track of who is saying what on long email threads, and in making future FOIA requests that ask for communications on particular topics. Additionally useful for those instances when public officials are actually using their personal email addresses instead of their government issued email addresses that may not be as easy to keep track of. So we do, and then finally, I would like to note that making that contact information, the justification for it was that some people may be harassed because they have contacted the government to express an opinion on a public issue. But this particular subcommittee is about phishing, which is using FOIA to obtain names in order to attack government systems or in some way trick an individual or government employee. And I don't think that this would address phishing. And on 68D, as I said, we're not opposed to it in concept. However, we would prefer that this remain as an opt-out situation instead of an opt-in situation that has been proposed. So thank you for your time, and I'll answer any questions if anyone has any.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your comments.
Next, we have Mark Hickman.
Mr. Hickman?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you again, Madam Chair and members of the council. Mark Hickman on behalf of the Virginia Press Association. Regarding the phishing study, VPA also prefers a draft ending in 968. We do not oppose adding members, the individual members of the public body, to the language, but we also do not believe the current opt-out structure should be flipped to an opt-in structure whereby someone would have to indicate approval for the public body to disclose such information. The current opt-out system should be kept. We also opposed a draft ending in 969 that will further expand the mandatory FOIA exclusion in subdivision 10 to include personal contact information provided to a public body for general correspondence. This would be a stark and broad departure from current practice and allow for anyone to remain anonymous when corresponding with a public body or its members for any reason. This is very different from the current one that applies only to simple one-way communication, as Alan pointed out, from the public body to an individual person, such as for informational newsletters. Two-way communication, especially when someone is requesting action or seeking specific information of public concern from a member of a public body, is at the heart of FOIA. Open government and the public's right to know, including access for the press. We also note that there is no link between this information and phishing. Appreciate the time. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Hickman. We appreciate your comments. Any additional speakers?
We have two other people that signed up, Daniel Jones and Shawri Neal. I'm not sure if they have joined by phone.
Yes, here. Can you hear me?
Is someone on the phone?
Yes, this is Shawri Neal, City of Portsmouth.
Okay, Shawri.
Hi, can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can hear you.
Hi, thank you again, subcommittee, for taking up this issue that was brought forth by Delegate Heretic on behalf of the city. Unfortunately, our IT director was unable to join us today, but in general, from what he had seen prior to this meeting, he said that we're supportive. I am concerned about the opt-in, opt-out issue, and regardless of whether you go with an opt-in or opt-out, I think it should be somewhere in very plain sight where a person would know that they had the ability to do one or the other. At this point in time, the way that the system is set up, it's kind of putting the onus on the citizen or the person to know that they have the ability to do so. So that would be a concern that I would have about that opt-in, opt-out piece. Other than that, I think we're pretty good with what we have so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Neal.
Those are all the speakers that are in the meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. Delegate Heretic, did you have any comments relative to what's been proposed thus far?
I want to thank the significant work that the subcommittee undertook. Yeah, Dr. Treadway chaired the subcommittee, and they really took a deep dive into this issue and took us in a number of directions that we've certainly hadn't previously considered, but I think are very important and very compelling nonetheless. The initiation of this legislative concept occurred through a request from the city of Portsmouth following what they believed to be a phishing attack, which was discovered in time but could have potentially resulted in the compromise of some very sensitive information. And in those conversations, the city began to realize that when any citizen transact business with its locality, from mundane things like, you didn't pick my trash up, to more complicated issues of public safety, making that simple communication with the locality potentially compromises material information, which could render that citizen or the individual that the city he or she is communicating with vulnerable to attack. What we're proposing here is not to abridge the media's right to access information. That's not it at all. What we're trying to do is trying to prevent, ensure that the security that surrounds this communication is respected and maintained to the extent that we can. It's for that reason that we certainly believe that citizens should be advised that they have the right to opt out of providing or of having that information withheld to requests. But at the same time, we should assume going into it that the means of communication, the email addresses, the identifiers that are proprietary to me as a citizen, are not released to anybody in the world that wants to see them. But at the same time, to allow for the media or whomever that may have an interest in whether or not my trash is being picked up on an average daily basis, to have that information going forward and to communicate me if they can find me and if I want to be found. I think there's a balance here between the public's right to know and the public's right to privacy and the security that we as government, as the government, have to respect in that balance. And for that, Madam Chair, again, I thank the work of the subcommittee. I hope it will be the will of the FOIA Council to adopt the recommendations.
Thank you, Delegate Heretic. Dr. Treadway, is there anything further, or committee members, any questions or concerns?
Madam Chair, this is Delegate Simon.
Delegate Simon?
So I hear Delegate Heretic's request that we accept the recommendation. I wasn't sure that I heard a recommendation from the subcommittee chair yet. Maybe we're getting to that. It appears that we sort of have a choice to make, if I'm understanding this correctly. between the 68 draft and the 69 draft, or Alan, do you think we could do both? I mean, there seem to be two different bills. I think we kind of need to pick. Am I right?
Delegate Simon, I mean, we could reconcile the language if you want to adopt. There are two different concepts amending the same exemption. So if you wanted to go forward with both and combine them into one, we can draft it that way. It's up to the will of the council at this point.
Thank you. And so, yeah, I guess the question is, the subcommittee chair, do you all have a recommendation, or is it, or not?
We did not take a vote, so as a subcommittee, we don't. There wasn't time for us to meet again to actually review the language. So the determination we made was we wanted to consider both of these options, and Alan proposed drafting them as two distinct options. So we are bringing it to the full council to get your feedback and so forth, but we didn't have time to actually review the language and meet again to vote.
Thank you. I'm clear now where we are procedurally, so I'm good for anybody else who has questions.
Any other comment?
Madam Chair,
I
yield to Mr. Wade.
You yielding to Mr. Wade?
He asked for the floor at the same time.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Wade.
I think this is Amigo Wade. Just had a quick question for Alan. I think that Mr. Heslinga had a concern about the redaction issue. How much of that time, if there is time involved in redaction, how much of that is recoverable, in terms of a chargeback to the requester?
Thank you, Mr. Wade. It is recoverable in that the current language of FOIA allows a public body to charge for time spent searching, accessing, duplicating, and supplying the requested records. And the Virginia Supreme Court has interpreted that to include what they called exclusion review. So you can charge for the time involved in redaction. I think, if I may, Mr. Heslinga, I did read his comments and I heard his comments today. I think part of his concern is just that it will potentially expand the total amount of time and the total costs involved.
Okay, I believe it was it Mr. Reeves?
Yes, Madam Chair. If I may, I would suggest that we take these two items up separately because they deal with two separate issues. The first, ending in 968, has to do with contact information supplied to members of a public body for the purpose of receiving electronic communication. So that expands it from public body to members of a public body. And it does not include employees. It's only the public body and members of the public body. And it does change that would change the existing opt-in, opt-out provision. Currently, one has to opt out of having her or his information made available. The idea was to change that to an opt-in. Regarding that, I would suggest that, and again, this is the first time all of us have had the opportunity to look at the draft, the subcommittee is not, that on line 66, provided that, I think the intent of the subcommittee was that be unless, and that actually is the way it's described on your agenda, that with the opt-out provision, that the information is not subject to mandatory disclosure unless the recipient requests that it be subject to disclosure. So I think the goal here is straightforward, that people citizens, residents of a locality who want to receive electronic communications from either the public body or any of its individual members, their contact information, email addresses, cell phone numbers should not be subject to mandatory disclosure, because of the possibility of fishing expeditions. Localities have long lists of names of its residents who want to receive this information. It would be very easy for someone who wanted to do fishing to request those lists and then have a list of hundreds of names of people who live in any given locality to which they could send bad emails intended to extract information. So if we might take these separately, I would move that the council recommend the draft as just described, 968, with the change that provided that be amended to read unless.
Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, you're muted.
Madam Chair. My microphone on.
I'm sorry, that was me not on. Yes, Senator Stewart.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before we take that up, and I don't want to take anything out of order, but I was just curious if we could look at this in a different way before there's a second to this motion. I understand what Delegate Heretic is talking about and how important that is. And what strikes me as in Madam Chair and Delegate Simon and Delegate Wampler, as legislators, we have the ability to have free communication with our constituents. And we don't provide that information to anyone. And that allows our constituents to tell us what their concerns are freely and openly and without concern for retaliation or whatever. By the same token, I get where the press is coming from. They want, and rightfully so, they want to know if somebody is doing something untoward, if there's some sort of backroom deal between a local supervisor and a contractor. And again, rightfully so, they should have that information because we all believe in transparency. But it seems to me and I don't know if this is possible, maybe Alan could address it, or Dr. Treadway, or you, or Amigo. He's probably the smartest one in the room, on the Zoom room. Is there a way to look at this in two stages? Perhaps you could redact people's contact information so that they're not subject to phishing, or for that matter, a sale of the list that somebody FOIAs from the locality just to get people's contact information and worry them. But if something were discovered in those communications, you could then make a separate application for the contact information for that person if the press felt like they needed to flesh out some backroom deal or something that was going on that shouldn't be going on. I don't know if that's possible. It's just, I think Delegate Heretic is on to something. I'm trying to figure out a way to help him get there, by the same time maintaining the transparency that I think everybody wants. So those are just my thoughts before there was a second.
Okay. We do have the motion. So any additional comments or a second to that motion?
Madam Chair.
Mr. Potter. Yes, Mr. Potter.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. A question for Delegate Heretic, if I might. Delegate Heretic, I'm just wondering, Delegate Heretic, is there any evidence that the Portsmouth incident that you referenced, the phishing attack, somehow originated from a FOIA request?
Madam Chair, I would respond to the question that it's my understanding from the Portsmouth Director of Information Technology, Daniel Jones, who was supposed to be on the call today, developed that information from a source in Virginia Beach where the information was initially phished. I can't give you the particulars, but that is my understanding.
So, Madam Chair?
Yes.
I've been concerned about this issue from being approached through a FOIA standpoint, because anyone who submits a FOIA request is in and of itself FOIA-able, I believe. And so a bad actor who submits a FOIA request in an attempt to obtain information to commit a crime is not a very good criminal, because anybody could find out who they are and what they're up to. So, I mean, I think this is a bit of I have felt for a while, this is a bit of a solution in search of a problem. And I'm not sure that the FOIA language is the best way to go at it. Certainly have no problem with adding members of the public body to that list of folks where it can be excluded. But I think going beyond that to correspondence with government officials is very dangerous. It makes it, there are a lot of John Smiths out there. And when it comes time to figure out who's writing to a government official and who's arguing for a particular position, differentiating between the John Smiths requires that contact information. It requires an address or a phone number or a name of a business to figure out who this person actually is who's contacting people. So I just, no problem at all with sticking with the language of adding public body members, but would suggest that we end the changes there and move on.
Additional comments?
Madam Chair? Mr. Reeves.
Mr. Reeves.
And I agree that there are separate issues here, and that's why I propose that we take the first one, 968 first, and vote on that, because I think there is broad consensus that adding or any of its members makes sense, and I don't know that there's any opposition to that. Dealing with general correspondence may be more controversial, and we should have a separate vote on that issue.
Madam Chair, this is Delegate Simon.
Yes, Delegate Simon.
I just want to make sure I understand your motion with the caveat. Does that do essentially what Mr. Potter just described, which is to add the members and doesn't change the opt-in, opt-out piece of it? So we just basically all it really does is add the public body or any of its members. So you suggest, again, sort of hard, it's one of the dangers of doing this electronically. I'm trying to follow the motion, because I think I agree with you. I think we should do the easy stuff, right? Which is, if we can dispose of 68 and improve it, I'm all for that, keep the meeting moving along. I just want to make sure what Mr. Potter said and what your motion is are compatible, or if he's asking for something that's different than what you moved.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Reeves.
Delegate Simon, yes, my motion deals just with 968 to add or any of its members. I am concerned about the way that lines 66 and 67 are drafted. The intent of the subcommittee was to change an opt-out to an opt-in, and I'm not sure the language as drafted currently does that. It would if we changed provided that to unless. However, I will quickly say that the more important thing is that we add or any of its members to the existing language of the statute. But my motion was to make both of those changes. It was to add or any of its members and to change provided that to unless in the draft that was provided to you.
So you're actually making two amendments.
To the existing statute. That's correct, Madam Chair. Adding or any of its members and changing opt-out to opt-in.
Madam Chair,
Okay.
if you like, I believe
Yes, Alan.
I could read this as a line amendment. I believe I know what Mr. Reeves means.
Okay.
It would be the draft 968D that's before you, with all of the changes that are in the draft as you see it, except on line 66 at the end of the line where it says provided that, we would strike provided that and change the provided that to an unless. So that first sentence in full would just read, personal contact information furnished to a public body or any of its members for the purpose of receiving electronic communications from the public body or any of its members, unless the recipient of such electronic communications indicates his approval for the public body to disclose such information.
Okay, so those would be the amendments being suggested, correct?
Yes, along with lines 70 through 71, it does also add or any of its members and changes electronic mail to communications, and then adds another or any of its members just to be consistent.
Okay, so those amendments are being proposed by Mr. Reeves. Second to that motion, those amendments.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded that we adopt those amendments as they have been proposed. Okay, do we need to call the roll on those amendments?
Yes, Madam Chair, I have the roll. Madam Chair, how do you vote?
Aye.
And Delegate Simon?
Aye.
Senator Stewart?
Aye.
Delegate Wampler?
Aye.
Ms. King-Cas?
Aye.
Dr. Treadway?
Aye.
Mr. Wade?
Aye.
Mr. Bujakowski?
Aye.
Mr. Coleburn?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I vote no. I vote no.
Okay. Mr. Conrad?
Aye.
Mr. James?
Nay.
Mr. Potter?
Nay, because of the opt-out provision.
Mr. Reeves?
Aye.
Madam Chair, the motion carries 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 to 3. It looks like.
Okay.
Doesn't sound right.
Okay, thanks. Yes, Mrs. Seltzer.
Yep, Mr. Seltzer, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I'm late arriving, but I would vote aye.
Aye. So, Madam Chair, the total vote then is 11 to 3.
Okay, thank you. Now that we have those amendments, what would be the pleasure on the actual, I think it's 968?
Madam Chair.
Delegate Simon.
Yeah, I think, if I understand, I think maybe there's some confusion about what we just voted on. If I understand what you were doing is that your intention was that we were voting on Mr. Reeves' amendments to the draft, not on the draft.
The draft.
But the amendments to
No.
the draft. We've adopted the amendments to the draft, and now the question is, do we recommend that the draft as amended be a recommendation of the FOIA Council for the 2021 session? And I would so move.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that the council recommend draft 968. I don't know if you would call the roll on that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So voting on 968 as amended, Senator Locke?
Aye.
And Delegate Simon?
Aye.
Senator Stewart?
Aye.
Delegate Wampler?
Aye.
Ms. King-Cas? Ms. King-Cas, I think you're muted. Aye, thank you. And Dr. Treadway?
Aye.
Mr. Wade?
Aye.
Mr. Bujakowski?
Aye.
Mr. Coleburn?
Nay.
Mr. Conrad?
Aye.
Mr. James?
Nay for the opt-out reasons.
Mr. Potter?
Nay.
And Mr. Reeves?
Aye.
And Mr. Seltzer?
Aye.
Madam Chair, again, it would be 11 to 3 The motion passes.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Dr. Treadway, and your subcommittee. Okay, we will now move to electronic meeting subcommittee. And I cannot.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Alan.
My apologies. The subcommittee did have the second draft on 969. I didn't know.
Oh, I'm sorry.
To make a motion or not on that.
On 969D.
Yes, Madam Chair.
Okay. Okay, we do have 969D. Okay, what is your pleasure on 969D?
Madam Chair,
Mr. Reeves.
I would like to offer some comments in response to comments that we've heard today. First, as for the concern about the additional time and costs involved in redaction, I would remind members of the council and members of the public that this is an exclusion from mandatory disclosure. There is nothing in this bill, as with the amendments that have been proposed, that would require that VITA or anyone else do this redaction. It would provide the public body and its employees with the option of redacting personal contact information from general correspondence. So this is the type of correspondence that members frequently, members of public bodies frequently receive from residents of their locality, members of the community, and often regards controversial issues. Just in the last year, public bodies have considered such matters as whether or not to remove Civil War statues from their community, whether or not that community should become a Second Amendment sanctuary city. And what we've seen is that people who take positions on these issues in correspondence with their elected representatives have had their names and their contact information put on Facebook and other forms of social media in an attempt to cause harassment of that citizen who is trying to communicate her or his view to their elected officials. And so it seems that for the purpose of encouraging the continuation of this type of communication between elected officials and their citizens, that some level of protection should be made optional, that the public body should be able to remove the cell phone number or the personal email address of people who are taking positions so that they will not be the subject of harassment. That is the intent of the proposed legislation embodied in draft 969D. I will say that I would support removing "or employees" in line 69 to reduce the scope. I don't think that the concern has to do with correspondence between citizens and employees of public bodies. It's correspondence with members of public bodies that has given rise to the types of concerns that I've described. And if we eliminate "or employees," that eliminates or reduces the amount of redaction that might be necessary and goes to address to some degree the concerns raised by Mr. Heslinga. So that is the purpose of 969D, and I would make a motion that the council support 969D with the elimination of the words "or employees" in line 69.
Is there a second to that amendment?
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded that we remove from line 69 or employees. Alan, would you please call a roll? Is there any discussion on that motion first?
Madam Chairman? This is Delegate Simon.
Delegate Simon?
Again, at the risk of slowing us down, I don't know how you distinguish between correspondence between me and my legislative aide when it comes to my delegate email address, right? And when I worked for Kate Hanley, when she was chairman of the Board of Supervisors, I answered a good deal, don't tell anybody, but I answered a good deal of correspondence. This was at the dawn of email. We were one of the first, we had chairman at fairfaxcounty.gov, and it was an early thing. I don't think she, well, that's how I said it. I don't think she knew how to work the email, right? So I answered a lot of the emails in the early 1990s. So I understand what the intent of the motion is, and they're trying to narrow the scope, but I don't know that you can distinguish that. I don't know that there's frankly a way to do it, because different members and different elected officials, I think, treat their email differently. And frankly, I think a lot of the stuff on a land use case, a lot of that correspondence is maybe going to your supervisor at drainsville.fairfaxcounty.gov or whatever, is really taking place between a chief of staff or a land use employee of the public body. And frankly, that's where the meat of it is. And so I appreciate what Mr. Reeves is trying to do here, but I think the motion on that we're on that to strike employees from line 69. I would have to oppose that. I think that if you're going to make this exception, it just doesn't work as a practical matter if you take employees out.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Mr. Reeves.
in light of Delegate Simon's comments, I withdraw my motion.
Okay, thank you. Then is there a motion on, keep forgetting the number, 969D?
Madam Chair, I would move that that the council recommend the bill drafted as 969D to the General Assembly.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that the council recommend 969D for adoption. I'm sorry, Alan, would you please call the roll?
Madam Chair,
Aye.
do we have any opportunity for, Madam Chair, do we have any opportunity for
Oh,
discussion?
I'm sorry. Discussion, please.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Potter.
I just would like to echo the comments of the Virginia Commission on Open Government and the Virginia Press Association that you heard earlier. I think this is a dangerous overreach to include in a FOIA exclusion. Having dealt with many localities with FOIA issues, they will take every advantage to redact. They will take every advantage to charge more for FOIA searches and to delay. And this just gives them additional opportunities to say it's going to take too long to redact all these email addresses and all these phone numbers from these documents, or we're going to have to charge you another $1,000 to do that. I think it's a dangerously broad overreach. I think it goes against the policy of transparency in government and limiting the exclusions to FOIA. I think there are better ways to address potential phishing attacks than eliminating key information from documents that are otherwise public. As I said before, when when a document becomes public, if all there is a name, that name doesn't have a lot of meaning without an address to know where the person is from. And so I just think this is dangerously broad. Thank you.
Thank you,
Madam
Mr.
Chair.
Potter. Further discussion.
Madam Chair, this is Billy Coleburn in Blackstone, Virginia.
Yes, Mr. Coleburn.
And I apologize. I've been on the road. I've traveled all the way 30, 40 miles during this meeting, so I'm having to rely on listening to everybody. I want to totally agree with what Bruce Potter said, and just a general observation. the name of the council, where the Freedom of Information Act Advisory Council, it seems like, this is my 5th year here, seems like every time we meet, it's curtailing information, it's concealing, it's making more exceptions to FOIA, and that's just a general, I guess you could say a general rant, but I think Bruce's comments were spot on. I'm an elected official. An elected official are human beings. You give us an inch, we'll take a mile. I totally agree with Bruce Potter.
Thank you, Mr. Coleburn. Additional discussion.
Would you like public comment now?
Oh, yes. Didn't we have public comment early on these?
My apologies. Phishing, yes.
But if we have people,
We have people for electronics, sorry.
Okay.
Criminal incident. Do you want to wait for those?
Yes, we want to wait for those. Yes.
Okay.
Because we're in the middle of voting on this one.
Thank you.
Okay. Go ahead, Alan. Call a roll.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Your vote?
Yes.
Delegate Simon?
No.
Senator Stewart?
Yes.
Delegate Wampler?
No.
Ms. King-Casey?
No.
Dr. Treadway?
No.
Mr. Wade?
No.
Mr. Bujakowski?
No.
Mr. Coleburn?
No.
Mr. Conrad?
Aye.
Mr. James?
Nay.
Mr. Potter?
No.
Mr. Reeves?
Aye.
Mr. Seltzer?
No.
Madam Chair, I have 4 ayes and 10 nays. The motion would fail.
Okay, so that motion fails. So that will move us away from the, that completes the discussion on the phishing subcommittee. Again, thank you, Dr. Treadway, and your subcommittee. We will now move to the electronic meeting subcommittee. We had one bill, House Bill 321, and thank you for your patience, Delegate Levine. Who was the chair of this subcommittee?
Madam Chair, I was.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Seltzer. If you could go ahead and address the work of this subcommittee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We took up 2 separate considerations for amendments to 2.2-3708.2. The first was to make more readily available, and I'm looking so that we're all singing from the same hymnal. I'm looking at 964D. The first category of changes you see in lines 11 through 18 to make more readily available remote participation in public meetings by members of public bodies. Just to give the full council some sense of the nature of the discussion that we had, the prevailing consensus was that making remote access more available to members of public bodies had the virtue of making public service more accessible to citizens who wish to participate. And as a result of that, making public bodies more representative and reflective of the communities they served. The flip side of that consideration was concerned that remote participation in a public meeting is, in terms of the quality of the meeting, just not as desirable as in-person participation. And I think most people felt that that was probably true, but that the virtues of permitting broader access to service by remote participation outweighed those considerations of an incrementally diminished quality of the meeting, and that ultimately public bodies and the officials who serve on them are accountable to the people who elect them or appoint them to serve in those capacities. And if they're not ultimately doing a good job for their constituencies, then they're answerable for that on the occasion of their appointment or reappointment or election. So that was the first consideration. And then we had it's a separate bill that takes up the second category, and that is 997D. And I don't know, Madam Chair, if you want to take up these two bills separately, and I'm glad to talk about the second one separately. I'm glad to briefly introduce it. And I know others, Delegate Hurst and Delegate Levine, may have comments as well by way of introduction, because these were important to them as well. But I'm glad to do that now or later, as you prefer, Madam Chair.
What is your preference, Delegate Levine?
I think they're two distinct issues. I think they're related, but I think you could support one without supporting the other. So I think it's probably easier to do them one at a time.
Okay, let's go back to 964D.
I think that's the sum and substance of my overview and introductory comment, Madam Chair. I'm glad to answer any questions anybody has. And I know that this was a matter of considerable discussion and interest. I will say too, I know I already said I was done talking, but I want to make one other point. And that is, in my relatively short time with the council, I don't think I've encountered a bill that generated as much public interest and comment as this one did. And although there was public comment in opposition to this, the overwhelming majority of the comments from the public were in favor of liberalizing the ability for public body members to participate remotely. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Delegate Levine.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I concur with everything that Mr. Seltzer said. I would just add a couple more things. The concern about policing it and making sure that it's not misused, that people aren't going virtual for no good reason at all. Mr. Seltzer points out that obviously, ultimately, that's up to the voters for elected officials and the appointing authority for appointed officials, and that's true. I would add that the statute provides that you have to say why you're not attending. You can't just not show up. You have to identify with specificity the nature of the personal matter. So it's not like folks just participate virtually. They have to explain it, and the body has to approve it. Your colleagues have to say whether or not what you're doing makes sense to them. Plus, the local body has to, prior to doing any of this, pass some ordinance or other rule specifying what's proper and what's not. So I think there are some other policing things to make sure this is not done as a runaway thing. I would note that there's two sort of side provisions to this. One is the medical part, and one is the 2 meetings or 25% part. The medical part, and I think you'll hear from a lot of commentary, I know there's some folks on the line, has to do with some real struggles that some local officials have had. The Vice Mayor of Alexandria had to take care of her mother, who was very ill in Florida, and a county board member in Arlington actually had a premature child that obviously required her attention. And yet I think actually they should be commended for wanting to continue their public service, even in the middle of these quite difficult medical problems. and that saying they can't do that while they're caring for such family member really is an impossible choice, particularly when, again, these are good public servants who want to attend. And then the second part was 2 meetings or 25%. The original law just says 2 meetings. And, for those that meet quarterly, attending virtually 2 meetings a year, half the meetings actually seems like that's enough. I agree it shouldn't be entirely virtual. But for folks like the Vice Mayor of Alexandria, they have a meeting every week. So missing 2, attending virtually 2 meetings out of 4 would be a lot, but attending virtually 3 meetings out of 52 is quite small. And we actually had some discussion in the subcommittee about whether to get rid of this requirement at all. There was some support for that, but actually Mr. Reeves came up with, I thought, a really good compromise of 25%. And again, there are protections to prevent this from being overused, but ultimately we want people to participate in these things. We've got all kinds of folks with families and other commitments. Some of these are not, remember this address is not just city councils and elected officials, but also appointed bodies. And we do want our citizens to be able to participate in these things. And I'm afraid that if you make this number too small, it will keep people, good people, diverse people throughout our communities from being a part of these commissions. So I strongly support the proposal.
Thank you, Delegate. Know that we have individuals to speak on this particular issue. We'll now have comments from the public.
You have Elizabeth Bennett Parker.
Madam Chair, members
Ms.
of
Bennett
the
Parker.
Council. Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the Council, thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Elizabeth Bennett Parker, and I serve as the Vice Mayor of Alexandria. I support the 2 bill drafts recommended to you by the Electronic Meetings Subcommittee. It's been almost a year exactly since I first wrote to you about increasing flexibility for individual members to participate electronically when there is a physical quorum. I keep hearing new ways in which the law's current restrictions have prevented people from doing the work they were appointed or elected to do, or from serving at all. Yesterday, I spoke with a resident who serves on an appointed board in their town. Their spouse had a heart attack in September, is recovering from surgery, as a result is immunocompromised and at higher risk for COVID. The board is currently meeting in person, and they were told after 2 meetings they could attend in person or they could miss the meetings. Our Chamber of Commerce told me this week their members are interested in increased flexibility to help them become members of and provide their business expertise to local boards. A school board member told me he had a couple work trips come up during especially busy meeting periods. After 2 meetings, he paid out of pocket for flights back and forth to attend these meetings. I'm glad for his community that he had the resources to do that, but not everyone would. Most elective offices are considered part-time, and people need other employment in order to be able to afford to live. Similarly, most appointed positions on local and regional boards are completely uncompensated. The subcommittee received comments outlining other situations that created conflicts with this law, including a lack of childcare. They also heard, as Delegate Levine mentioned, from a county board member who gave birth prematurely during budget season, which entails multiple meetings per week. Her son was in the NICU for a month, and after she participated virtually twice, she was forced to watch from the sidelines, email questions to her colleagues to ask during the meeting, and take note of areas in which she wanted to provide follow-up commentary that she was unable to offer in real time. Comments posted on the website from members of the public, regional bodies, organizations like the American Association of University Women, members of advisory bodies, and 61 local elected officials from 20 public bodies support even broader changes than what the subcommittee approved. And an overwhelming majority of other states do not place restrictions on individual electronic participation when there is a physical quorum. So please vote to approve the subcommittee's recommendation of allowing up to 25% of meetings and adding the language about a family member's medical condition. I would also support an amendment that removes the word serious in reference to a family member's medical condition that requires care and prevents physical attendance. The definition of serious is unclear, and members of public bodies should be able to care for family members when needed. As Delegate Lane mentioned, there's a number of guardrails already in the current law that can allow for this greater flexibility while retaining transparency and accountability. In addition to requiring the physical quorum and the voice of the participant to be heard by all, the law requires the meeting minutes to include the member's specific personal matter and location. Additionally, the body must have a written electronic participation policy allowing for and governing participation. The recommendation before you does not mandate electronic participation. In addition to deciding whether or not to allow it, public bodies have the authority to govern it by adopting additional guidelines or restrictions suited to their circumstances and community. All of these guardrails serve to hamper any potential excessive use of this policy. These modernizations are desperately needed, and we've had almost 9 months of a very unfortunate study called COVID that has shown that people can effectively participate in meetings electronically. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Who do we have next?
I'm happy to speak unless there's a set list.
I don't know, but go ahead, Miss. Is it Mel?
Yes, Ms. Marin. Thank you, Senator.
Okay. Yes.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Melanie Marin. I am a first-term school board member in Fairfax County. I'm also a Sorensen Institute grad, so it's really so great to be here with you all because I have spent a lot of time understanding different aspects of the state, and I can understand different needs for flexibility, which is why the proposal from the subcommittee is something that I think can benefit everyone in the Commonwealth. It would provide flexibility at the local level for local bodies to decide what works best for them. I'm really glad that Delegate Levine mentioned the parity issue. I've been spending some time doing a quick off-the-cuff analysis. I looked at 2019 numbers, and in 2019, my school board met 109 times, and one could argue if all those meetings were needed, was it too much or little, but that's the fact. And that doesn't include committees, just full body meetings. And in comparison to that 109, one of our neighboring public school districts had 64. So 2 meetings for us is quite a different issue of parity than 2 meetings for that neighboring jurisdiction. Similarly, my husband is on a town advisory committee. He meets once a month. So to do that, that's also an issue of great parity. The percentage that he can participate virtually is far more than I could. So I greatly support the recommendation in that aspect. I do want to share that hopefully you've had a chance to review that letter signed by 61 elected officials around the Commonwealth. I was really glad to be part of that effort once we learned the subcommittee's recommendation on Wednesday. Myself and others worked over the weekend to conduct outreach. And that's how passionately people feel about needing this flexibility, not just in the time of COVID, just in regular times. We also, again, advisory committee members also seek this flexibility. So I do want to say that, in times as a mother with 2 young children, if my husband is out of town for work and I've got one sick, I don't want to miss a meeting. I'm proud to say that of the approximately 133 meetings we've had this particular year, I've missed, I believe, 1 or 2 because of virtual meetings. So that is an astounding attendance rate, and I believe that my constituents benefit because of that. So I do believe that this is going to promote better service to constituents, and there are guardrails in place, and the decision ultimately lies with the local body. So I please ask you to support the subcommittee's recommendation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Mary. Okay, we'll go to, is it Phyllis? Is it Irico?
Irico, yes, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Phyllis Irico from the Virginia Association of Counties, and also speaking for the Virginia Municipal League this afternoon. We support the proposed amendment to Delegate Levine's. Transparency and balance are really important to our members, the elected officials, and we want to have good quality participation by our members, but some flexibility in light of the pressures of today's world and the increase in the availability of technology lends itself to looking at these issues, to discussing these issues. And I think that the proposed amendments are very good ones that do strike a balance. And I hope we continue to look at this issue. But I think this is a great proposal to deal with the balance in this situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Libby Garvey.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to us today. And I know I spoke to the smaller group. Gosh, was it just last week? I will be brief and say basically some of the things I've said before, very much in support of moving forward here. I've been in elected office now for about a quarter century. And when we started, we really used, carbon copies were really carbon copies. We used telephones that we had and they had cords. The times have changed so much. And of course, FOIA applied then and it applies now. And I find more and more that these laws and things, they were great and they're put in place. They're still important. The goals of FOIA really should not change. But if the point is to make things transparent and make government more accessible to people, we now have tools that we never had before in the form of these virtual meetings. So I find there are many, we could all go over personal instances where it's made all of the difference in the world to be able to participate virtually. I've had a broken collarbone, among some other things. And actually that gets to another point. I'm not sure I want to enumerate all my personal medical issues that I've had over the years, nor do I want to go into all those of my family members that have needed me. So I would really encourage you to allow a fair amount of flexibility when people have to give reasons. That can get pretty intrusive, and you can have people with family members with issues that they really just don't want the whole world to know about. And does the whole world need to know? I believe with the safeguards that you've got here, and actually the fact that this method of participating really makes it more accessible to more people, outweighs any need for sort of the public to know all kinds of personal details of people's lives that we really maybe shouldn't have to share. So I think we'll stop there. I will just urge you, look at the goals of the FOIA legislation. If it's transparency and accessibility, don't look about the way we used to do it. Look at what the goals are and how we can meet them even better. And I think technology does certainly allow that. Finally, I will say, I heard in the setup a little bit that, there are concerns about that the virtual is not as good as in person. Yes. And I think we all feel that. And that alone is going to keep bodies meeting in person, because it is more satisfying in many ways. But to add the 21st century flexibility we've got now, I think will really help make use of the kind of technology we've got and be one of the good things to come out of this pandemic. So I hope you improve it. I hope you just look at the goals of what FOIA is and then figure out how we can reach them. And I think you'll find that the technology that we've got meets all of those goals. So thank you so much for your time and really appreciate you considering this issue. I think it's really important. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Garvey. Debbie Barato.
Yes, hi, thank you. I don't feel I'm considered the public as far as accessing FOIA. I'm a family member of one of the victims. I want to have rights to access. Right now, we are getting nothing, zero, from the city of Virginia Beach. And
I'm sorry, Ms. Barato, are you here for electronic meetings?
Yes, definitely, especially with times like these.
Okay.
And, but this was my only opportunity to say that, with all the discussions of the public coming in and asking for information, I don't want to be stereotyped as the public. This is important that we are able to even access this for the FOIA. So it's very important to us as family members to be able to access the information required for us to move on. Right now, there's qualified immunity, there's sovereign immunity, and that leaves the public and people, victims, families, completely avoided from any information. So that's really what I wanted to say more than anything. Thank you.
Thank you. Is it Daniels?
Hi, did you say Loretta Daniels?
Yes.
Hi, how are you doing? Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the council. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak before you today. My name is Dr. Loretta Copeland Daniels, and I do hold an elected position. I'm advocating for the two changes recommended by your committee: the codification of the authority for the public bodies to address any subject during an emergency electronic meeting, and increasing the flexibility for individual members to participate in meetings electronically where there is a physical quorum. Keep in mind that giving flexibilities to board members is a welcome change to many members who may want to participate but can't due to circumstances beyond their control. One example that comes to mind and where flexibility could be useful is when a board member has plans to go out of town and they've already purchased their tickets, and then is informed prior to getting on the plane that there's an upcoming impromptu meeting a few days before the now scheduled meeting. If that member decides to attend the meeting electronically, now that member has now used up one of their electronic meeting allowances. Therefore, I do support the move from 10 to 25% of allowable electronic meetings for local bodies, giving them more flexibilities to members of local bodies. In the long run, the public benefits from their representative input and decision-making. I also ask that the council take another look at the word serious in reference to a family member's medical condition that will allow for electronic participation. I am proposing that this word be removed because it puts the local bodies in a position to define a serious medical condition and what is not a serious medical condition. Members of the public body should be able to care for family members when needed. Some things to consider is it a serious medical condition when a member has to care for a family member who has just had surgery? Or is it a serious medical condition when a member gives birth to a child? What about an emergency room visit due to a member's believing that a family member has COVID-19, the flu, or some other condition that has prompted the emergency room visit? I'm asking that the committee take another look at the term serious in reference to a family member's medical condition. With the modernization of technology, we need an overhaul of how we conduct our meetings. I like the term that was used earlier, 21st century flexibility. It captures where we need to be as a Commonwealth. We've had 9 months to get a feel for how people can participate in electronic meetings. We have data to support how successful some of our participation has been. And so I do support the changes that were outlined previously. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Daniels.
You have Vic Nichols in the room?
Yes, this is Vic Nichols. I apologize for the video is not exactly working on this machine. Thank you for allowing the public to weigh on this, and Delegate Levine will actually be on the same side together with this one. Couple of things. I also agree on the medical service issues or things like that. We've had some members that they would have one major problem and then another one following right behind it. So being able to keep up with being in the meetings that way would be absolutely helpful. And one thing I didn't hear anyone talk about was reserve service or military service. We have right now actually on our city council is a member who is still doing reserve duty. So he could be gone 2 to 3 weeks. And if he's gone unfortunately at the right or unright times, he can miss several meetings. So it puts him behind. Now his reserve service is done during the day. So at night when the meetings are held, he could participate. And this is going to be a lot more helpful to be able to have him be able to participate rather than sit there and try to watch something later or put his input in or stuff like that. So that's also, you know, for the military people too. One other thing, it's kind of a little bit of a joke, but I have attended more council and planning commission meetings than some other folks have, where they've missed a few. So it would allow them to be able to keep in touch and still participate and do their duty with being able to have a little bit more flexibility as to what's going on. That's it. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
We have Amy Siebert.
Amy Siebert.
Yes, this is Amy. I was actually hoping to talk about the other bill that you're considering, which is the pandemic one. So I'm happy to defer and let other folks talk about this bill, if that's okay.
We could go ahead and get everyone in.
Okay, that's fine. Happy to do that as well. So thank you, Amy Perrin-Seibert, to talk briefly about the other bill that is being considered, which is the one looking at how to hold an electronic public meeting during an emergency. We have been working, and I have been working with a large group of stakeholders since March, honestly, working on the issue of trying to ensure access to electronic public meetings during a governor's declared emergency. And we are supportive of the language that is currently on the website that FOIA put in, but we are requesting amendments. We've been working really hard, again, to come up with consensus between VML and VACO, the Virginia Press Association, Virginia Coalition for Open Government, lots of local governments themselves, as well as regional public bodies like VRE and NBTC and NBTA. So working, again, really hard. And what we're asking for are some line amendments to add some clarifying language.
Madam Chair, if I could just interrupt for a second.
Delegate Simon.
Just to let Amy know and to let the members of the FOIA Council know, those line amendments are also on the website. I sent them to Alan ahead of time. So if anybody is curious as to what she's talking about, I've went ahead in the interest of transparency and published the line amendments on the website ahead of time. So they're available for folks to download on the Wednesday, December 2nd agenda. It's the last hyperlink. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I want to let everybody know that it's not a big secret. It's out there.
Yeah, no, perfect. Thank you. I appreciate you doing that. I mean, I think the language that we're adding it doesn't change the intent of the law that's up there right now, but what it does is just add some clear guidance on, when you are holding this public meeting, what you can discuss, which is basically continuity of business, as well as all lawful purposes and responsibilities of that public body. And it also makes clear that when the emergency is over, both the governor's declared emergency or a locally declared emergency, this language also, this process goes away. You no longer can meet electronically and you revert back to having to have a quorum in person. Again, the idea is that, this is when this is impractical or unsafe to meet in person, that you can have these electronic meetings where you can continue to conduct business. Obviously, the pandemic has shown a light on this and how important this language is. We think that the amendments make this bill a great compromise. We appreciate certainly the help of Delegate Levine, who worked on this, as well as the subcommittee chair, Colin Seltzer, and all the other folks who we have been working on this with. And so we hope that those amendments that will be offered later will be supported. We look forward to having this bill in the 2021 General Assembly. The language expires in the budget, which is where it is right now, in June of 2021. So it's important that we have the language in the statute moving forward. Delegate Rip Sullivan has actually already put a draft request in, so we have a spot, and he is going to continue to help us with that. He worked on the Attorney General's opinion back in the spring, as well as helping with the governor's budget language. So just wanted to let everybody know that, and happy to answer any questions if anybody has any. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy.
Next, we have Shawri Neal.
Shawri Neal. Shawri, you're muted.
Good afternoon, Senator Locke and members of the chair. Basically, just on behalf of the City of Portsmouth, I'm the Intergovernmental Affairs Manager. Haven't seen any of the amendments, but do support the intent of both of the drafts that are out there. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Next, you have Megan Rhyne.
Megan Rhyne.
Hi, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. So I have spoken against the expansion of these call-in opportunities. So this is in relation to Delegate Levine's bill. I've spoken against them in the past, but I have been persuaded that more flexibility is needed. So while I'm not exactly going to jump up and down and endorse this proposal, and we're not going to be opposing it in the same way, but I did feel a need to respond to a couple of comments, and that we are talking here, the goal of FOIA has been mentioned. And to that point, I would note that the FOIA policy statement says that procedures are to be interpreted liberally to afford every opportunity to citizens to witness the operations of government. And going more and more virtual does not serve that policy when you have truncated participation and interaction among members. So I do want to just make very clear that that physical interaction and video-based interaction, and we've always said that video is a critical component, that is compromised as we take more and more opportunities to participate from our homes, our offices, our cars, our vacations, what have you. I agree that 21st century technology should be used, and it should be used to make sure that more and more of the public are able to witness the operations of government by being able to see what's going on. It is not to be used necessarily for the benefit of elected officials to make their jobs, their difficult jobs, more convenient. That is an unfortunate and very cold sounding kind of statement, I realize, but that is part of the public service model. And many of us have been unable to participate in public service because of our obligations of our family and our friends and jobs and life. So this is not a new problem, and I would just want to make sure that the council doesn't go down the path of adopting these, and eliminating some of these guardrails that we've been talking about based on the pandemic, and not on the fact that these are issues that have been going on for years and years and years. So I'm not sure if that made sense, but thank you for your comments. And yes, we will not be opposing this bill.
Thank you.
The last one to sign up for this topic is Mark Hickman.
Mr. Hickman?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Mark Hickman again on behalf of the Virginia Press Association. VPA has been consistent and clear in our strong support for a comprehensive study of electronic meetings during 2021 after the upcoming regular session, rather than a piecemeal approach. So speaking to Delegate Levine's bill, we have no objections to adding language to allow electronic participation when taking care of the sick family member, but we do not support changing or eliminating the 2-meeting limit in the personal matters section in that bill at this time. Instead, we ask that you please refer that issue to a comprehensive study. The subcommittee already voted to extend its business into 2021, when this complex and intricate matter can be taken up much more deliberatively. So thank you for your time and consideration again.
Thank you, Mr. Hickman. Okay, and that concludes public comment on the electronic meetings. Mr. Seltzer.
Yes, Madam Chair.
Okay, so we will address 964D. Do you have any additional comments on this particular piece of legislation? This draft?
Well, I do have just a couple of points I'd like to make in response to some of the very thoughtful comments that others have shared. And I would just note too, that I was struck in the subcommittee work with how thoughtful and edifying both our colleagues on the subcommittee and the members of the public have been. It's kind of fun when there's so many people who are so engaged and interested in this conversation and people are taking it seriously. We did all this work remotely. I don't think that was lost on the members of the subcommittee when they were considering this particular series of amendments. We've all learned a lot over the past 6 or 9 months about how to work remotely, and I think we found it, for the most part, a successful and helpful process. I want to emphasize that when these liberalized remote participation requirements do not eliminate the need for a quorum of the public body to still be present physically. So the kind of dystopian fear that we'd all appear by hologram, I don't think that's feasible under the current law. And this bill doesn't propose to change that. I want to just emphasize too that the proposed bill has 2 conceivable sorts of reasons why a member of a public body might participate remotely. The first is in the event of disability or medical need. In those circumstances, there is no limit on the number of times that somebody may participate remotely. The limitation is the 25% limitation, or 2 meetings, whichever is greater. That limitation applies to members of public bodies who wish to participate remotely for a quote unquote personal matter or personal reason. When I say quote unquote, you'd think I would know if it was a matter or reason. It's one of those. People who have a physical disability or medical disability or a medical reason for not being able to participate, they needn't worry that their ability to participate remotely is constrained by a numerical cap. But people who have a need to participate remotely for a personal reason, a pre-planned vacation, that kind of stuff, life happens kind of reasons, a work reason, those remote participations would be limited to 25% or 2, whichever is the greater number. I urge the council's support of these proposed amendments. I think they make government more accessible to people. And I think, as others have mentioned, our technology today permits us to have remarkably good access to members of public bodies, even when participating electronically, both inside and outside of actual formal meetings. So I'm glad to answer any questions. I know there are others who have excellent insight as well, but would urge the council's support. And at some point when the council's comments conclude, I'll be glad to make a motion for the council's approval of this 969D for approval and recommendation to the General Assembly. The only other thing I would mention is there were several comments urging removal of the word serious in line 12. Hang on. I made reference to the wrong.
I think you meant 64D, right? 964D?
I did. Thank you, Delegate Simon. 964D. At line 12, a number of the members of the public have commented both today and in written comment, urging removal of
It's
the
on
word
line
serious.
12 and 25.
That's right, Madam Chair. I will tell the council, I'm persuaded of the wisdom of removing serious, and would support an amendment to this draft to remove serious.
Second.
I'm glad to characterize it as a motion, and I hear there's a second.
I'm happy to second that, to remove the word serious on lines 12 and 25.
Okay, it's removed and seconded that we remove the word serious from lines 12 and 25. All in favor? Or do we have to take roll call?
Madam Chair, I believe we do because of the electronic nature of this meeting.
Okay.
Your vote,
Call
Madam
roll.
Chair?
Like meeting.
Aye.
And Delegate Simon?
Aye.
Senator Stewart?
He disappeared.
All right. Delegate Wampler?
Aye on the amendment to remove serious.
Ms. King-Casey?
Aye.
Dr. Treadway?
Aye.
Mr. Wade?
Aye.
Mr. Bujakowski?
Aye.
Mr. Coleburn?
Aye on the amendment. On the amendment.
Mr. Conrad?
Aye.
Mr. James?
Aye.
Mr. Potter?
Aye.
Mr. Reeves?
Aye.
And Mr. Seltzer?
Aye.
It appears to be unanimous. The motion to amend carries.
Any additional discussion on the draft 964D?
Madam Chair,
Mr. Reeves?
I would encourage members of the council to support the motion. As you have heard today, there were a number of comments, a very large number of comments offered by the public in support of eliminating any cap whatsoever. I think that ultimately members of the subcommittee decided that putting in the 25% cap was a reasonable compromise that allowed persons who had personal matters, members of public bodies who had personal matters keeping them from attending all of the meetings, could nonetheless participate remotely for up to 25% of them. That seems like a reasonable compromise at this stage. It may be that next year, if a more comprehensive look at this section is conducted by the council, that some change might be considered, but as it stands, I hope that members of the council will support the bill as it's currently drafted.
Further comment?
Madam Chair?
Delegate Levine?
Yes, and I one thing I noticed, and I apologize that I did not notice this in the subcommittee, so it's a bit late, and if folks don't like this, then I'm certainly fine as it is. But one thing I noticed is that a medical condition that requires the member to provide care for such family member, I wonder if we shouldn't change the word requires to allows the member to provide care for such family member. One could argue that you could hire a professional doctor or nurse to take care of your family member and you're not required to be there. And to me, that I don't think we need to get into that. That basically, I would recommend we change the word requires in 13 and in 25 to the word allows. Someone's taking care of a family member. That's what we're talking about. We're not saying that they're required to be there. You know, a spouse doesn't, I guess, have to be there to provide care. They could have a nurse there, but we all understand why a spouse or a parent or a child would want to be there. So even though I'm just catching this at this late moment, I want to hear from, and I can't make a motion, obviously I'm not on the committee, but I would wonder whether others would consider changing the word requires in 13 and 25 to allows and allowed.
Madam Chair?
Delegate Simon?
I think I appreciate the concern, I think that what the FOIA council is going to do is recommend this. Certainly, it's still got to go through the regular legislative process during session. And I think maybe, because I don't know that allows the right word either. And we've already, we're hour and 45 minutes into a 2-hour meeting. We got a couple of bills to go. So rather than trying to now, maybe I would love to have somebody recommend. I think it's going the right direction. Let's keep this moving forward, Delegate Levine, and not slow down the train right now.
I'm fine with that.
Mr. Seltz?
In light of those comments, Madam Chair, at this time I'd move that the council recommend to the General Assembly adoption of 964D.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded that the council recommend adoption of 964D to the General Assembly.
Madam Chair, could I have one discussion point real quick?
Yes.
Just one point I'd like to make. Earlier, the committee sub-chair, Mr. Seltzer, pointed out accurately that the bill would still require a physical quorum present. One of my concerns among many, especially those cited by Ms. Megan Rhyne of VCOG, Virginia Coalition of Open Government, when you have 2 or more members remote and the meeting is going on and there is a contentious issue taking place and there's maybe some citizens at the town hall or wherever the venue is making points, there's nothing to stop 2 members who are meeting remotely from having a private discussion, perhaps even arranging, agreeing how they're going to vote. There's no public safeguard there. And I think this is another example of where some unfortunate real life examples. I certainly want to commend the vice mayor for looking after her mother and the other health issues cited previously. But here we go again, just like the fishing bill. That was all because of someone in Portsmouth clicked on an email they weren't supposed to click on. And here we go down this long rabbit hole of just, looking to make public service easier for the elected officials. None of us campaigned that we were going to legislate through our laptops. So I just strongly object to both bills. I know I'm going to get outvoted. And I just want to offer that for the record. It's in respect, and I appreciate all y'all's opinions, but I just had to get that on the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Coleburn.
Madam Chair. Madam Chair.
Yes. Was someone trying to speak?
Yes, Madam Chair. Bruce Potter.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Potter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just very briefly, because we did discuss this quite a bit in subcommittee, fully support adding the exclusion for caring for a family member and fully understand those circumstances. But I think we are again going down a dangerous path of expanding, by expanding the second part of this, the percentage of meetings, and because it doesn't promote transparency, it makes it more difficult when folks are participating remotely for the public to have access to those people. They can't go up to them after a meeting and ask a question about why they voted a certain way or why they said what they did during the meeting. So I think from the standpoint of transparency, and also we need to remember this affects every public body, state, local, advisory, every public body. It's a very broad piece of legislation from that standpoint. So for that reason, I oppose it in subcommittee and will oppose it here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Potter. Any further discussion?
I'm sure we're ready to vote.
But I don't think there's anything that would prohibit the public from contacting the absent elected official who is participating in a meeting electronically for reason of taking care of a sick family member, because that is the reason for this legislation, to inquire as to the reason for a vote after the meeting, they can continue to contact them to determine why they voted the way that they did. This doesn't prohibit that. You know, they may not be able to physically come up to them after a meeting, but they can still contact them to ask about or inquire about a vote or why they voted the way that they did. They do that.
Madam Chair, I'd respectfully call the question if it's proper at this time.
Thank you. Please call for the vote.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On the motion to recommend the draft 964D as amended, how do you vote, Madam Chair?
Aye.
Delegate Simon?
Aye.
Senator Stewart, is he back?
I don't see him.
Don't see him, okay. Delegate Wampler?
Aye.
Ms. King-Cas?
Aye.
Dr. Treadway?
Aye.
Mr. Wade?
Aye.
Mr. Bujakowski? I don't see Mr. Bujakowski. Okay. Mr. Coleburn?
No.
Mr. Conrad?
Aye.
Mr. James?
Aye.
Mr. Potter?
Nay.
Mr. Reeves?
Aye.
And Mr. Seltzer?
Aye.
Madam Chair, the motion carries by a vote of 10-2.
Thank you. Mr. Seltzer, the second piece.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The second bill is 997D, amending the same code section. This bill was intended to address the issue that we all learned about the hard way. And if you hear my dogs barking, you should assume it's your dogs barking. Sorry. What was I saying about remote participation? Excuse
Champion, I think you said.
What we have learned in the course of the pandemic is that public bodies have important work to discharge. And under current law, in the absence of budget resolutions that were recently passed, public bodies could convene remotely only for very limited purposes, essentially to discuss the purpose of the meeting had to be to address the emergency that required the remote meeting. For many public bodies around the Commonwealth, that proved a really, I hesitate to indulge the hyperbole, but a really dangerous limitation. In the time of emergency, public bodies really needed the flexibility to act in the public need quickly and responsively, and being hamstrung and not being able to address ordinary functions of government during an emergency had the effect of exacerbating the emergency. Fortunately, we got an Attorney General's opinion that bought us a little bit of leeway. Fortunately, budget language carved out some opportunity for continuity of operations. But this proposed legislation at lines 27 through 41 makes clear that public bodies can continue to operate in the ordinary course of business. Delegate Simon mentioned earlier, and Ms. Siebert did, that they've crafted additional language that Delegate Simon has posted or had posted to the FOIA Council's website. That language has the effect of clarifying some of the contours of the permissible conduct And it seems reasonable to me and a sensible enough compromise. So I support the bill as written. I also support the additional language that Delegate Simon has arranged to have posted, along with the Virginia Municipal League and some other stakeholders who worked very hard, I know, to try and find language that would get us to a path. So that's by way of introducing 997D. Glad to answer any questions about the subcommittee's deliberations or considerations, and appreciate the group's views on the matter.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Simon.
Yeah, if it's appropriate at this time, I would move these line amendments. Just if it's okay with the chair, is it all right to do this now?
Just go ahead and do those.
Yep. So and they're available online. So on line 30, we're unstriking the Romanet I. On line 31, unstriking the word and on line 32, unstriking Romanet 2. The purpose of the meeting is to, and adding language that says, quote, provide for the continuity of operations of the public body and the discharge of its lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities. And then do sort of new line beginning after line 44 that reads, the provisions of the subdivision shall be applicable only for the duration of the emergency declared pursuant to section 44-146.17 or 44-.146.21. And you can see, if you have it online available, how that reads as a complete sentence. And I'll just do this quickly. So it would now read, any public body or any joint meetings thereof may meet by electronic communication means without a quorum of the public body physically assembled at one location when the governor has declared a state of emergency in accordance with section 44-146.17, or the locality in which the public body is located has declared a local state of emergency pursuant to 44-146.21, provided that, one, the catastrophic nature of the declared emergency makes it impracticable or unsafe to assemble a quorum in a single location, and Romanet 2, the purpose of the meeting is to provide for the continuity of operations of the public body and the discharge of its lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities. I think that the idea was to narrow the scope of this to try and make it as closely as possible resemble what the Attorney General had sort of allowed for and what the budget language had allowed for. And with these changes, I believe we now have some consistent, we like to call in the General Assembly, peace in the valley, and it has the endorsement of the Press Association, the Coalition for Open Government, Delegate Sullivan, who's, I think, put this bill in, Ms. Seibert with VACO and VML. I think everybody now is pleased with this language as amended. So that'd be the amendments I would move.
I'd second those amendments.
Okay, it has been moved and seconded that we adopt the amendments as read. Please call the roll.
Thank you, Madam Chair. How do you vote?
Aye.
Delegate Simon?
Aye.
And I do not see Senator Stewart. Delegate Wampler?
Abstain.
Ms. King-Cas?
Aye.
Dr. Treadway?
Aye.
Mr. Wade?
Aye.
And I do not see Mr. Bujakowski. Mr. Coleburn?
I'm going to abstain on this.
Mr. Conrad?
Aye.
Mr. James?
Aye.
Mr. Potter?
He's there.
Mr. Potter, you may be muted.
Aye.
Aye, thank you.
Sorry, too far from the mic.
No problem. Mr. Reeves?
Aye.
And Mr. Seltzer?
Aye.
The motion passes 10 aye. There are no nays, 2 abstentions.
Thank you. Mr. Seltzer, are we any further discussion on the actual draft itself?
I don't have anything to add to my earlier comments. Of course, glad to hear anything else folks have to say.
Any additional discussion on the draft legislation?
Madam Chair, this is Delegate Wampler.
Yes, Delegate Wampler.
So some of the language is a little concerning to me, in specifically, between lines 27 and 41. the meat of this proposed bill, it seems to me that we are going to pigeonhole localities that want to meet electronically or in some sort of hybrid format. We are going to say that the only way that you can participate electronic or hold an electronic meeting is one, under the situation which is described in subsection A, where a member has a physical issue or medical condition, or a family member has a medical condition. And then separate and apart from that, we are now granting an authority for the first time, I think, in Virginia's history, to allow public bodies to meet electronically if there is either one, a governor declared state of emergency, or two, if there is a locality that designates a state of emergency for their local jurisdiction. And so, I don't have any issue moving towards electronic meetings or electronic participation models for the Commonwealth and for all our public bodies. But it seems to me that the way this bill is written, is drawn to incentivize local governments to remain in this state of emergency declaration so that they can meet electronically throughout the remainder of this pandemic and any future pandemics. And, without creeping away from this bill and what it gets, speaks to directly, I just think that's not the direction we should take as a legislative body and as FOIA counsel, as a recommending body to the legislature. I think there are other ways we can go about establishing a model for electronic participation without pigeonholing localities into having this state of emergency or governor's declaration of emergency. What I worry about, I think most of the members of the House are aware of my position on virtual versus in-person meetings, but what I worry about is now the case, let's say, a rural locality like many of those that I represent. Say they adopt a virtual meeting, stance for their conducting public business going forward. Now what will happen is, under this section, they will be purely electronic meeting. And I think that poses a real possibility of disenfranchisement of public participation in rural areas. I looked at the membership of the FOIA Council, and with the exception of maybe 2 or 3 members, everyone is from Richmond or Fairfax. And the case is in Southwest Virginia, Southside Virginia, and many parts of the Valley. And I can speak specifically for my House district. 48% of families do not have internet at their homes. Those include Board of Supervisors members. Those include town council members and city council members across my district. And so, if we move to this purely electronic meeting method, then those who don't have internet connectivity are going to be prevented from participating fully at an open meeting that has traditionally been afforded to them under Virginia code. And so, I see where we're trying to go. I just don't think this bill fully addresses, or maybe effectively addresses, the needs of local governments going forward. I think there was comments made earlier, maybe in reference to another draft, not this one, but, point is, governments need the ability to continue to conduct business, even during this pandemic. It's just, I hope I voiced my opinion clearly in that I don't think we should move to a purely virtual model. In-person participation can't be replaced. And I think there's real threat to, disenfranchisement in the local policy and decision-making process if we allow this bill to go forward with the FOIA Council's recommendation. And I'm happy to discuss it any further, and if there are any questions any members have of me and my concerns, I'm happy to discuss those now. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Delegate Wampler. I can assure you I'm neither from Richmond nor Northern Virginia. Okay, other comments or questions?
Madam Chair.
Delegate
Levine.
What's going on with my? No, but something was happening. Yes, Delegate Levine.
And I do apologize. I know I'm not a member of the council, but I was available for the subcommittee meeting. And I think I may be able to address briefly Delegate Wampler's concern, if I may briefly. The local emergency is required under section 44-146.21 of the Virginia Code. And it's not something to be trifled with lightly. It's not something that a locality would just declare an emergency just to get virtual meetings. It requires that they cannot convene due to disaster or other exigent circumstances. The local director of emergency management has to consent to it. You have to activate the local emergency operations plan when you do that. And it actually goes so far as that you can regulate food, fuel, clothing, and other commodities. It's quite a severe declaration. And to me, it would be, you can imagine a hurricane or a fire or a bomb threat or COVID, something very, very serious. I don't think it could just be, done willy-nilly because folks want to convene virtually. It's actually quite detailed in the statute to very limited circumstances. I just wanted to make that point. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, if I can jump back in.
Yes, Delegate Wampler.
Thank you, Delegate Levine, for that. I considered that section when I was thinking about making comments in this meeting. And if we're trying to allow local governments to participate electronically in meetings, then let's do that without tying it to a declaration of emergency. If that's where the FOIA Council wants to go, let's go there. If that's where the General Assembly wants to go, let's go there. But it seems to me that everything else in the FOIA code section points against purely virtual meetings. And no less than 6 code sections that I can count, it says that, you have to convene at a physical location and do everything you can to make that location open to the public. And so, by tying this to local declaration of emergency, we are incentivizing local governments to choose that as a route because they all are concerned about this current pandemic. They're worried about getting their staff sick, themselves sick, their family sick, and we don't want that. But there's a way to write this bill without drawing it to a declaration of emergency, and I think that's what we ought to do. And further on the emergency point, when localities go into a declaration of emergency, like you mentioned, Delegate Levine, and they can do all these things that they typically cannot do, such as regulating the use, sale, and production and distribution of food, fuel, and other things. If you scroll down in that code section, it also says that they can proceed without regard to time-consuming procedures and formalities prescribed by law. These are exactly the policies that we built in FOIA over the last 52 years, that mandate discussion and debate publicly in front of the members of the public that you represent. This is exactly what we're talking about. So again, I think there's a way to do this without drawing it to an emergency declaration. It's not going to get my support. I hope the council won't endorse it as a recommendation to the General Assembly without figuring out a way to draw this more generally, not drawn to a declaration of emergency. And I'm happy to work with anybody on that and getting to that result. But as of now, I'm not going to be able to support the bill. Thank you for the time, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Delegate Wampler. Any further discussion on 997D?
Madam Chair, this is Colin Seltzer.
Yes, Ms.
The only other point I would make, and I take Delegate Wampler's point, the language, I think the subcommittee certainly felt that we did not want to broadly license and permit remote participation without a physical quorum, except under emergency circumstances. That it's the emergency that justifies and must exist in order to justify the departure from the presumption in favor of a physical meeting. The language in the code that we do not change in this proposed bill is that the catastrophic nature of the declared emergency makes it impracticable or unsafe to assemble a quorum in a single location. So that's the condition precedent before there can be a permissible remote meeting during the state of emergency. It's got to be essentially physically unsafe to be there. And that's in addition to the declaration of emergency. So if you think of it as sort of in the old missile silos, you have to have a number of keys turned before you can launch. The first key is that the governor of the locality's got to declare a state of emergency. And the second key is that the emergency makes it unsafe to assemble physically and have a quorum physically present. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I'm sure we don't have that one. I would move to recommend the LD as amended, LD 997D as amended.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that 997D as amended be recommended for approval. All those in favor, please call the roll.
Thank you, Madam Chair. How do you vote?
Aye.
Delegate Simon?
Aye.
Delegate Wampler?
No.
Ms. King-Casey?
Aye.
Dr. Treadway?
Aye.
Mr. Wade?
Aye.
And Mr. Coleburn?
No.
Mr. Conrad?
Aye.
Mr. James?
Aye.
Mr. Potter?
Aye.
Mr. Reeves?
Aye.
Mr. Seltzer?
Aye.
And I'm double checking. I believe Senator Stewart and Mr. Bujikowski remain absent. Yes. Madam Chair, the bill passes then with 10 ayes and 2 noes.
Okay, that passes 10 ayes, 2 noes. Thank you very much. That completes the work of Electronic Meeting Subcommittee. Thank you very much to Mr. Seltzer and his subcommittee. We will now move to the Criminal Incident Information Subcommittee. You've been very patient, Delegate Hurst. Thank you. We will now move to Delegate Simon for a report of the subcommittee.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you to my subcommittee members. Briefly, before I get into the bill, I will say that we met twice and probably over about 4 hours of total meeting time. Took a lot of testimony and went to a great deal of effort to try and wordsmith this bill to address as many of the concerns of the stakeholders and Chiefs of Police Association, local sheriffs, corrections officers, and so forth as we could, and still maintain the integrity of what we were trying to do with the bill. I will also note that the recommendation of the subcommittee was unanimous, that the full committee make this a recommendation of the FOIA Council. So just a couple things as it's getting late to try and maybe help you all take a shortcut. We spent a lot of time on it already, took a lot of testimony, worked hard to get the words right, and it was a unanimous recommendation of the subcommittee. With that, I will go ahead and leave it to the bill's patron, the original bill patron, Delegate Hurst, to briefly fill you guys in on what the substance of what we were trying to do was and is.
Delegate Hurst.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you also to Chairman Simon for taking on this post. And I appreciate too, Madam Chair, your desire to have this be vetted by the FOIA Council. And I think that we have a much better product now than we did when this bill was introduced in the special session, one that ultimately I think will be better for Virginians. So the basic premise is wanting to make a departure in what we've done and saying that once there are inactive criminal investigative files, that those files are able to be and required to be released to the public unless there are certain reasons why not. Right now, there is an option for there to be disclosure up to the decision-making by law enforcement agencies, and we routinely find that no files are ever released to families or to people who have been convicted who may have been wrongly convicted, or to the public on matters that are of, I think, extreme public importance, like officer-involved shootings. So what is different in this version to what was introduced? By and large, we've decided to say, listen, when it comes to writing this statute, other states and the federal government have it right and have a pretty good framework. And that is what we have for you with this bill. We have moved the relevant information out of 2.2-3706 and moved it into a new form. And that also too then adopts where we are on wanting to have kind of the federal language be in there instead of anything that we had tried to write previously. So what does that mean? It means that you have to have some certain conditions and standards that are enumerated in the bill if you want to challenge the release of that information. Things like a reasonable likelihood of invasion of unwarranted personal privacy, and also too that it might jeopardize an investigation. So the language is in, and I think kind of speaks for itself. But I would be more than happy to answer any questions that the council may have on this piece of legislation.
Thank you, Delegate Hurst. Before we get to any discussion of the council members, do we have any speakers from the public?
Yes, ma'am. We have Debbie Barato to start.
Okay, Ms. Barato.
You're still muted, I think.
You also have Jason Nixon.
Okay, we'll come back to her. Jason Nixon.
Maybe Beth Powers.
Yes, I can go if neither of the others are.
And I would just say quickly that
Ms. Powers.
Sorry,
Ms. Powers.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, Delegate Hurst, were you just saying something? I'm sorry.
All I was going to say is that Jason Nixon and Debbie Barato have also submitted written testimony for the council if we can't get them here to testify on the call.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Ms. Powers.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. My name is Beth Powers. I am a state policy advocate at the Innocence Project. The Innocence Project at University. Oh,
I'll come back to you, Mr. Nixon. Ms. Powers.
Right.
Okay.
Now.
Okay, I'm going to continue.
You guys hear me?
I'll come back to you, Mr. Nixon, as soon as Ms. Powers is done.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much. The Innocence Project at University of Virginia School of Law, Mid-Atlantic Innocence Project, and National Innocence Project make up the Virginia Innocence Coalition, which advocates for policies that address and prevent wrongful convictions. Our coalition strongly supports this bill and encourages the Virginia Freedom of Information Council to support it. While the majority of states, 32 states, and the federal government presume public access to inactive criminal investigative files, Virginia's law gives agencies complete discretion on releasing this information. So agencies frequently deny requests, leaving crime victims without closure, police shooting victims without justice, and wrongfully convicted people without a way to prove innocence. This proposed legislation is based on the Federal Freedom of Information Act, which is the model used in 12 other states. It presumes public access to criminal investigative files unless the case is ongoing, meaning the prosecution has not been finally adjudicated or law enforcement is continuing to gather evidence, and release would jeopardize the investigation. So custodians can block release if a court finds by a preponderance of evidence that any of the following conditions would result from the disclosure: an interference with ongoing law enforcement investigation or proceedings, deprivation of the right to a fair trial, unwarranted invasion of personal privacy, disclosure of identity of a confidential informant, disclosure of law enforcement technique or procedure that could risk circumvention of the law, or endangerment of life or safety of an individual. And I just want to tell you the reason that it's important to us. One is exonerating the innocent. Innocence organizations are regularly denied requests for criminal investigative files, which is an important source of critical leads and exculpatory information in wrongful conviction cases. For example, a corrupt police officer framed 4 innocent sailors in the Norfolk 4 case and is now in federal prison for other crimes. And innocent organizations are unable to review other cases in which the detective may have framed innocent people because requests for investigative files have been rejected by the Norfolk Police Department. By contrast, in Maryland, where they have a robust public records law, it's played an important role in overturning wrongful convictions. So you may recall last November, the Harlem Park Three were exonerated of a Baltimore murder after spending 36 years in prison. And through a public records request filed with the Attorney General, one of the men obtained a previously hidden police report that revealed the identity of the actual perpetrator. And without access to that information, those 3 innocent men would still be in prison. The second reason is delivering justice to crime victims. Crime victim families have been denied access to investigative records that may answer questions about what happened to their loved ones. The Virginia Beach Police have refused to disclose its investigative files to the families of victims in last year's Virginia Beach mass shooting. And finally, ensuring fair investigations of police-involved killings. In Virginia, when an officer kills someone, it's investigated by local agencies, state police, or both. And there's no way of knowing whether police are adequately investigating their own because agencies can withhold the findings from the public. Transparency will allow for external oversight and enhance justice for victims who were killed or brutalized by officers. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much, Ms. Powers. Mr. Nixon?
Yes, ma'am. You hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'd like for y'all to just sit there for a minute and think about this. If this was your family member, what would you do to make sure they didn't die in vain? I've been asking questions from day one. My wife was second in charge of public utilities. There's a lot of things I know about this case that the police will not tell you. I know Delegate Hurst, when his fiance was murdered, the police were up front and they gave him the answers he's asking for. So why isn't the City of Virginia Beach Police Department releasing my wife's personal journals? There's 5 of them. Personal journals that we paid for, and they're her thoughts. They won't give them back to us. It's been almost 2 years. I still can't get her iPad back. What is causing the City of Virginia Beach to be so inclusive and not give us information we're asking for? Why? What gives them the right to know more about intimate details of my wife's murder than I do as a husband? My children cry at bed every night. You know, I'm right now, I thought Christmas, the first Christmas was going to be hard. The second Christmas is probably harder, I think. And I just want you guys to realize this could be your family members. This could be your loved ones, your sons, your daughters, your wives, your husbands. What would you do? Would you not go to every length of the earth to try to make sure this is done right and that you get the answers that you need? It's not fair that the city or anybody can control information pertaining to the murder of my wife. The Information of Freedom Act, it's not the information just discretion. Who gives them that power and right? I mean, this is not just me, it's everywhere. It's people are locked up right now. Innocent people are locked up in jail and they can't get out because you've got some kind of stuff that went on in the investigation they don't want you to know about. It's locked up and it's at their discretion to give it to you. My lawyers can't even get information they need. What gives them that right? I mean, think about this. I keep hearing that you guys, well, the police department talks about it's money, time, money and time. Well, don't we have people already allocated to go through FOIA? Aren't they already hired to do so? I don't understand the restrictions on FOIA. Freedom of Information Act is not, it's supposed to be there for the public. It's supposed to be there for the families of victims. There might be certain circumstances where a judge may have to rule on something, but not my case. My case is done. They won't even give me the results of the investigation. They said it's too gruesome. I talked to my wife at 4:06 when she'd been shot. She told me she'd been shot. She told me to call 911. I'm the reason 911 came to the building 2 that day. I don't understand how people can get away with withholding information from the family members. I just don't understand it. It's not right. It's wrong. And something needs to be done about it, you know, and we talked about this in the subcommittee, and the subcommittee agreed with what we were talking about. This is a no-brainer. Like if you guys had family members that you were involved with right now and you had to go through what I'm going through, you'd be fighting. You'd be fighting to the end of this. And I'm not done by any chance. I mean, there's a lot of things I still want to change, because if I'm not changing this, then who's going to change it? You know, I just believe that there's no reason someone should withhold information of a loved one's murder or a crime incident and not give them the full details of what happened to their loved one. I know my wife was murdered. I know she's not coming back. I know she was shot 4 times. I know she was shot execution style. I know she also tried to help save people and caused them to drop the ammunition bag. That's when he had a shootout. They had no more bullets in his gun because of Josh and Kate. But no one's telling you that. There's a lot of things in this investigation that are wrong. And I'm going to tell you the truth of it, the matter of it. There's some business deals in the city of Virginia Beach that they don't want you to see. That's the reason the FBI wasn't allowed in. They were just there to take questioning and forensics. They weren't allowed to go into the internal part of it. The city of Virginia Beach kept ownership of that from day one. And there's only one reason behind that. And I can go on and on. I mean, like I said, my wife was second in charge of public utilities. There isn't anything I don't know about public words dealings. And I just want to make sure that this comes out right. I'm afforded the opportunity to see every detail within my wife's murder. And I don't understand what the big hush is. And the personal journals, let me tell you about the personal journals. I read them for an hour. There's stuff in there that says, yes, Dwayne was being insubordinate, and they know it. They know it from 2016 when I leaked emails. But they still deny it because they don't want accountability. And after the day, this is what we've been doing from day one, is trying to get accountability of my wife's murder. Nobody wakes up in the morning and goes, oh, I'm going to shoot 12 people. I'm going to shoot 16 total. Nobody wakes up in the middle of the night and morning and says, I'm going to do that. That's pre-planned. It's premeditated. There was things going on back in 2016 that the city don't want you to know about. And when I call them out on the carpet, they say, oh, yes, we had a meeting. Yes, but no one recorded it. Come on. You had a city attorney. You had a director of HR there. You had Kate's boss. You had Dwayne's boss. You had Dwayne's direct supervisor. And you didn't record the meeting? Especially when he said in the email he felt isolated and confused because Kate was being promoted to Engineer 5. There's a lot more internal stuff going on in that investigation that anybody even knows. I know it all because Kate told me everything. And I just want to make sure you guys understand the importance of the restrictions of FOIA. I mean, when attorneys can't get information to defend their clients, the press relations, they can't get information to help investigate the situation. Why? What are we trying to hide? Who are we really protecting? You can't be protecting Kate or you can't be protecting Dwayne because they're already deceased. In my case, so who are you really trying to protect? Your CYA, and that's just the bottom line. We have to have these restrictions revoked. It's not fair to the public, and it's not fair to the people that have to live with this every day, like me. My kids need to know answers. I need to know answers. I'm not going to tell my kids all the gruesome details, but I have to know them. It's my right. It's nobody else's. Nobody else was married to Kate. I was. And I just want you guys to just take a moment and think about that. Think about if that was your loved one. What would you guys be doing right now? Because I'm doing everything I can do. I've been lobbied against. We went for the state investigation, and I got the city of Virginia Beach paying a lot of lobbyists against me, and we got it through. But, I'm just a little guy. I ain't got all that money and power. I mean, I'm just trying to get the answers and get the truth out. And by taking restrictions off of FOIA, you're going to open a lot of doors. You really are. With the state investigation, we get an IT team in there. I'm going to be able to get emails that I need. I'm going to be able to find HR records that were destroyed or gotten rid of. I can tell you for a fact that Kate, 18 months prior to being murdered, wrote him up through HR. Officially. There's a lot of stuff that they don't.
Mr. Nixon, we need to move on to some other people, but thank you.
Sure. Okay, well, I just want you guys to think about that, please. It could be your loved ones too. Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate your testimony.
We have David Ostwinkle.
Mr. Ostwinkle.
Good afternoon, members of the council. David Ostwinkle, Virginia State Police. Appreciate the opportunity to allow me to speak. The department doesn't take any position on the bill, but we do have one concern, and that relates to the department and the volume of records that potentially could be subject to the language in the proposal. The department responded to 3,800 requests approximately last year, and we anticipate 4,500 this year. Of those 3,800 last year, approximately 750 were withheld. And while we don't know the nature of whether or not those requests would fall into the definition of ongoing in the proposal, we estimate that potentially hundreds of those cases could be subject to release. And with that, it would be necessary to properly redact and release that information under the proposal. We anticipate that not only will that involve quite a bit of time, but there will also be an additional demand. We know that there's an underlying demand for cases, particularly high profile and sensitive cases. Oftentimes those cases are measured in volume, not in files, but in banker's boxes or file cabinets. And they're voluminous in nature. We know that there'll be a heavy lift in terms of being able to respond, particularly in light of having to redact those. We would only urge the council to consider that a recommendation that additional time would be needed for the public bodies to respond in producing those closed cases in redacted form, especially in light of the nature of the cases, many of which have been noted today that will be voluminous in nature. And that is indeed our only concern. We would just ask that you would take that up for consideration, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Mr. Ostwinkle. Is Ms. Barato there? Or is it Megan? Yes, go ahead, Megan.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. And members of the council, thank you to Delegate Hurst for all of his work on this and for all of the other folks who have been participating. There have been quite a number of emails flying over this over the past several months. We do support the bill. The Coalition for Open Government supports the bill. I wanted to put a couple things in perspective, and that one was that the focus is most certainly on the high profile cases and the voluminous cases, but I do want to remind you that this would also apply to the criminal investigative records related to an office burglary or a traffic accident where charges were brought on involuntary manslaughter, or I guess that is high profile. But the point being that this is the whole universe of criminal investigative records, and there has been no access to any of them. They can be denied and have been in practice almost in total, no matter what is being asked for, including for suicides, until the General Assembly changed that law 2 years ago. And so this has been a barrier for the families, as Mr. Nixon has already testified to, for those who've been convicted, for reporters, for academics, for researchers. And I have been contacted by people from all of those categories over the years who have not been able to get any of these records. I'm sympathetic to Mr. Ostwinkle's point that this will be probably there will be an uptick in cases, but I would like to suggest that one of the reasons there's going to be such a big groundswell of demand is because these records have been so routinely denied over the years. And that when access starts to become routine and a matter of course, that those costs will go down, that there is going to be more consideration that when the records are being created and filed and managed, that these are public records, and there will be a better expectation by all involved about how those records are accessed. There are tools in FOIA already to deal with voluminous requests, and if those need to be tweaked, that is a discussion to be had later, but there are tools in existence right now, including petitioning a judge for additional time. So I would urge the committee to support this draft, and I thank again Delegate Hurst for bringing it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Shawri King-Cas. I'm sorry, Neil.
Shawri Neal.
Sherry's muted.
Shawri, you're muted.
Just press *6 maybe.
Miss Neal and Miss Barato are the last two.
Shawri, you're muted.
They may have been waiting so long that they're away from their devices at the moment.
Okay, Ms. Barato, are you there? Okay, we need to move on. Okay, Delegate Simon, do you have anything further?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I'm going to make a motion in just a second. I do want to address Mr. Ostwinkler and Ms. Rhyne both mentioned that there are tools to allow for more time when necessary. And we discussed that at the subcommittee as well. That typically the way these negotiations go, you can do anything for enough money, right? So if they have 7 days to go through all these banker boxes, they need to hire 30 people to do that and pass that cost on to the requester. It's a huge number. And then they go to the requester and say, or you can give us more time to do it with our existing staff. So I think that we've got existing tools, as Megan said, within FOIA for people to get to the right balance of time versus cost. There's nothing here that says that these are free, by the way. I mean, it's like everything else in FOIA. If there's additional time, the requester still bears the cost. So I think that being the case, the one sort of objection, I think the consensus of the subcommittee was let's what Megan suggests, let's use the existing FOIA tools to let that particular issue work itself out. And if we do need to come back and revisit it, we'll have that opportunity to do so. So with that, Madam Chairman, I would move that the council recommend make the LD 996D a recommendation of the FOIA Council for the 2021 General Assembly session.
I second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded that 966D be recommended to the General Assembly. Is there any additional discussion on 966D?
Madam Chair.
If not, Mr. Reeves.
Madam Chair, I will be brief, and I do intend to support the motion because I fully support the provision of this type of information to the family of victims and to persons representing defendants, such as the good people at the Innocence Project. I will say that I am concerned, however, that the protection of information by law enforcement, information such as investigations, which would include surveillance techniques and undercover officers, there is a provision allowing for that to be protected, but it requires legal action, and that may lead to a lot of litigation. I also am concerned about the provision requiring the release of transcripts of interviews between victims and law enforcement. If you think about victims of crimes such as domestic violence and rape and fraud, I'm not sure there's I don't know of any reason why the public needs to have access to the specific questions and answers given in those interviews between enforcement and the unfortunate victims of those crimes. However, I understand the purpose of the bill and I will support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Any additional discussion? Okay, Alan, please call for the vote.
Thank you. Senator Locke, how did you vote?
Aye.
Delegate Simon?
Aye.
And Senator Stewart is still absent. So Delegate Wampler?
He's there, but he's muted.
If you can hear us. Okay. Madam Chair, I'll skip over Delegate Wampler for now. Ms. King-Casey?
Aye.
Dr. Treadway,
Aye.
Mr. Wade,
Aye.
and I believe Mr. Bujakowski is also absent. And Mr. Coleburn.
First yes of the day, yes.
Got you.
Mr. Conrad.
Aye.
Mr. James.
Aye.
Mr. Potter.
Aye.
Mr. Reeves.
Aye.
Mr. Seltzer.
Aye.
Madam Chair, it appears to be unanimous, except we did not hear from Delegate Wampler, who,
Yeah, they're still muted there.
yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. And thank you, Delegate Simon, and your subcommittee. Okay, we now move to legislative preview. Alan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have not been contacted, so unless anyone is here to speak in the public speaking queue, and I am not aware of anyone who's been contacted who wanted to present any legislative proposals.
Okay, thank you very much. We're now down to agenda item 4. Any additional discussion from any member of the council? I know you all are worn out. Okay. Any down to agenda item number 5? Any additional business? Verification on types of government websites to which meeting notices must be posted. Alan.
Madam Chair, this arises from a general district court case in Wise County, where a judge in the case held that the term official public government website may only refer to .gov types of websites. I can tell you from when we changed the terminology to official public government website, the intent was to capture whatever website the agency or locality used as its public government official website, and not to include things like an individual member of a body or individual employee posting things like meeting notices where they're just sharing on their own personal Facebook page or something like that. But we wanted to be some official site, but there was no discussion at that time of whether it had to be a .gov or some other form. I can tell you, just as examples, I know there are localities, and the one in that case used a .com, and the judge ruled that was not an official site. Other localities use .net, some do use .gov. I know there are still state agencies that use the state.va.us form of website, as well as the Virginia.gov websites. So there is variety. We wanted to make the council aware of the issue and ask if it's something you wanted to bring up probably for next year, since we're at the end of this year.
So we'll just address it in 2021. Okay. The next two are updates on training and formal and informal requests.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just quick update. We have adopted a lot due to COVID-19. Currently, with our FOIA training that we've had now for several years for FOIA officers on the Commonwealth of Virginia Learning Center, we are, as of this morning, up to 768 users. We have presented 37 live trainings for this period, this reporting period, which actually goes from December 1 of last year through November 30th, due to our annual report requirement technically being on December 1. We additionally, just from September, October, and November, we can report we've had requests for 400 certificates based on 4 trainings we did virtually then. I know we did a training it was all virtual, but hosted by Fairfax in August that had nearly 400 attendees from about 70 different jurisdictions. So we are continuing our training mission. We're converting a lot of it to virtual training and doing a lot of stuff online because of COVID-19. As for the statistics on formal and informal requests, we have converted over. We actually started it last year. We used to track all these manually and in paper. We converted over to using Google Sheets and Google Forms to track these kind of midway through last year. This is the first full year we've done it. And the current totals, we have, I believe it's 1,996 informal inquiries by email, phone, in person, and other means for the last reporting period. And I just want to give everybody an update. When we do the annual report, it is necessarily going to change the way we report those statistics because we're going from the paper format to Google, so we can present it a little bit differently. So I just wanted people to be aware of that. But that is all the business that I have, Madam Chair.
Okay. Thank you very much, Alan. Appreciate that. We're now down to agenda item number 6. Do we have anyone else holding on for public comment?
No, ma'am. Everyone has spoken.
Okay, thank you very much. And in terms of future meetings, we will not be having any additional meetings in 2020. Our next meeting will not be until after the General Assembly session in 2021. Anyone else? Any additional comments from council members? You have held in there tremendously. This has been a marathon session. You've done yeoman's work today. Thank you all very much for your work. And the subcommittee chairs, you have done tremendous work. Thank you so much. I appreciate all that you've done. And hope you have a wonderful holiday season. Stay safe and stay healthy.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam
We're
Chair.
adjourned.
Well
We're
done.
adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.